prepare yourself for tales of the creepy, the terrible, and the awful things that hide in the night. Welcome to these dark spaces. The Carnival Girl. That world was all I ever knew. That small room with no windows and only the one door. The door that, when I was a good girl, I got to go through and see the bright lights and people. Father used to tell me that when I went out, I was one of the special people. All of the people there were. They all had a mother and father that looked out for them and made sure that they were safe. "Do they have special rooms too?" I asked him in that small child's voice I had back then. He just smiled and nodded. "Yes, Anna, they do. Very special rooms that are just for them, just like yours is for you." I'd smiled and grabbed Father's hand, dragging him towards the cotton candy machine. Looking back now, I realized my room was small, very small, but it seemed so large for a child of small stature like me. Mother and Father had decorated it for me when I was very young. Bright colors on the walls, so many soft blankets that I could wrap up in, and a bed on the floor where I would sleep each night. Mother and Father loved me very much, and when I was a little bit older, they hung twinkly lights from the ceiling above my bed. Almost every night I would watch them shine, little beacons in the darkness of the room, until my eyes closed to sleep. Mother spent more time with me than Father. Father would go and would sometimes be gone for a long time. Mother would sometimes leave with him too. But I wasn't afraid. I knew the big door with the loud lock would keep me safe while they were gone. I would sit and wait for them, coloring in my book by candlelight or making up little games to keep myself busy. I couldn't wait to show Mother and Father my games when they returned. When they needed to leave for a long time, they would leave food in the small refrigerator by the door for me to eat. I was always a good girl and never ate more than I should for each meal, though. I didn't want them to be disappointed when they came back. If I had been especially good, sometimes I would find a small pink box in the very back of the very bottom drawer with a special treat. I'd always find it right away when it was there, but I was a good girl and didn't eat it until I'd finished my other food. Sometimes I even had some left when they came back. Mother always smelled so lovely, like the fresh air when I would be good enough to go get to see the lights, but more sweet. She would hug me and the scent would cling to me, and I could still smell it hours later sometimes. Father always smelled the same, a heady smell, sometimes punctuated by a small amount of something that made my nose feel funny and itch a little. He would come in, kneel and spread his arms open wide, waiting for me to run to him and cling to his embrace. That was a special place. I felt safe there, wrapped in his large, strong arms and smelling his scent. He would pull back and smile, tussle my hair a bit, and then stand and walk towards the chairs where he and Mother would sit while they were with me. We would smile and laugh and sometimes play games, either pretend ones or the ones that they sometimes brought down with them. My favorite was Candyland. I loved the colors on the board and dreamed of a day when I might go out and see if I could find that place among the lights and music. Then, that night came. We were sitting there, Mother and Father in their chairs, when Father started coughing and putting his hand up to his chest like he was reciting the Pledge of Obedience to the world of light. Mother's eyes had widened, and she raced to his side. Father's breathing wasn't deep and full as it usually was. Mother hooked her arms under his and began to lift, pulling him to his feet and moving towards the heavy door. Mother looked at me, struggling, and then looked at the door, a pleading look in her eyes. I ran to the door and flung it wide. They never locked it when they were with me, there and able to protect me. Mother grunted something that sounded like thank you and dragged Father through the door and down the hall until she disappeared around the corner at the end. Then there I stood, small and alone. Panic began to set in as the door was open and Mother and Father were not there to protect me. I threw the door closed, putting my full weight against it to ensure it stayed there. I had hoped that somehow the lock would engage, that some magic would close it so that I could stay safe. But the familiar bang of the lock that I had heard so many times never came. The door stayed closed, but I knew I wasn't safe. I sprinted for my bed, diving under the sheets and blankets, trying to make myself as small as possible and hide from the inevitable evils that I dreamed were coming to take me away. I'm still not sure how long I spent like that, straining to listen to every sound, thinking it might be one of the evil ones Father talked about coming to take me away from them. Finally, I peeked out over one of the blankets, daring to look around the room. The door was still closed, but Mother and Father hadn't returned yet. I'm worried about Father. He was acting strangely when he and Mother left. I'd wanted to help more, but Mother only wanted me to open the door. Not seeing any imminent danger, I slowly pushed back the blankets and stood beside my bed in silence. After building my courage, I walked over to the door and placed my hand on it. "Mother? Father?" I called out, loud but not so loud that any of the evil ones might find me. No answer. I tried again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. Just the same complete silence of the room around me. But Father had always taught me to be brave. He said that especially when I got to go see the lights, I had to be brave because there were lots of the others there, and he didn't want anything to happen to me. So I decided I would be brave. For Father. I turned the knob, and a quiet click that was deafening in the silence, bouncing off the bright, hard concrete walls, signaled that it was open. Pulling as hard as my small frame would allow, I opened the door, its hinges squeaking slightly as they had for as long as I could remember, and stared out into the empty hallway. It was well lit from lights above it, much brighter than my special room, but I knew that. I'd seen it when we made trips to see the lights. It always took my eyes a bit to adjust to it when I first came out, blinding me for only a moment before my eyes would get used to the drastic change in lighting. I stood frozen, my mind reeling, trying to decide what to do next. Do I go and see if I can help Mother? She and Father couldn't have gone far. The place with the lights wasn't so big, so it should be easy to track them down. But first, I had to step out. I'd never gone out on my own. Father forbade it. He said that since I was still so small, I needed him with me to protect him from those that hated the light. But eventually, the part of me that loved Mother and Father so much won out, and I took that first step out, crossing the threshold, and stepping out to the cold tile floor in only my bare feet. I discovered the first step was the hardest, and each step after that became easier and easier. I was going to help Mother and Father and make sure that he was okay. My feet moved faster, and I broke into a sprint, covering the ground between my room and the corner in less than a minute. I rounded the corner that I'd gone around so many times but was stopped short. The door, the one Father usually opened when we went to see the lights, was closed. Father told me never to open it when it was closed, so bad things don't come in. But I decided that some things are more important than listening to Father right now. He was in trouble, and I had to make sure he was safe. I frantically tried to turn the knob, but it wouldn't move. No matter how much force I used, I could not get it to turn. Tears started rolling down my cheeks, and I pounded on the door, hoping that something somehow would give and it would open. After several minutes, I slumped to the floor, exhausted. I sobbed, not knowing what was going to happen to Father or if they would even return. It was then, there laying on the floor, that I saw the small box hidden behind the grate where the air came in. I looked at it curiously, wiping the last tears away from my eyes, and moved closer. It was small and black, about the same size as the hat Father sometimes wore when we were together. But this was black and shiny, with a small round silver part in the center of it. I pulled at the grate, trying to remove it and get a closer look. It was such a strange place to put such a thing, and I wanted to know more. But the grate wouldn't move. The screws on either side held fast, not even allowing it to wiggle, much less come loose. I sat back and stared at the thing, this small black intrusion into my world. Why had I never seen it before in the times I went up? It was small, but not so small that it wouldn't be easily seen, and not so hidden that it could never be found. Then it hit me. The small coins my father had given me long ago. They were thin and might be able to fit into the slots on the screws. I leapt to my feet, racing back down the hall, and dug through my toy box until I found a small velvet purse that held the coins. I was back at the grate even faster than before and dumped the coins on the floor in front of me, their ringing echoing back down the hall. I tried one, too large, and another, too small. The third coin I tried slotted in perfectly, and with a good bit of effort, I was able to get the first screw to turn. Anticipation was getting the best of me, and it felt like forever until I could get the first screw free. I quickly went to work on the second screw, and it moved more quickly than the first. The screw dropped to the floor, and the grate all but fell out and landed on the floor with a mighty crash. Panic kicked in, and I wondered if those evil ones had heard it. I waited before moving, but no sound came. I quickly snatched up the box and sprinted back to my room, slamming the door behind me so hard that it popped back open. But I didn't care. I turned the box over and over in my hands, hearing things shifting around inside, colliding with the sides with each turn. I inspected the small silver part on the front and stuck my fingernail in the little slot, but nothing happened. Then I remembered about when Father and I would come back from seeing the lights and people. He would pull out his set of keys, put one into the lock that looked much like this, turn it, and the door would open. A key. I needed a key, but where would I possibly find one? I needed to hurry because I knew if Mother and Father found me with this box, they'd probably be very mad at me, and I don't like it when they're mad at me. It scares me. But then I saw it. Mother's bag. In her panic, she must have left it behind. I'd never been allowed to look in her bag, though. That was hers, and it was personal. But Mother wasn't here right now, was she? I glanced back over my shoulder down the hall past the partially open door and unzipped the bag. I rifled through it, searching for something that looked like Father's ring of keys, but came up empty. Maybe Father had taken it with him, along with the other keys. Defeated, I slumped down on the floor next to the bag, knocking it over. A small clink made me look over at the fallen bag, and there, inside of the purse in a small side pocket, was a glint of silver. I reached over and pulled the small key ring free of the bag, finding one very small key and 2 large keys. I dove for my bed where the box still lay and fumbled with the smaller key, trying to get it into the lock. Finally, it clicked into place and I turned it, holding my breath. The top popped open, and I lifted it slowly as if something inside might attack. But all I found inside were envelopes. There were 6 envelopes in all, each with a name written on the outside. One of them was mine. Each of the others were full when I shook them, and I could tell that there was something inside, but they were sealed up. Only mine was still open, and there was nothing inside. I didn't dare open any of the others, as I knew that somehow Mother and Father would find out, and then they would yell. Maybe even hit me. But I knew they only did it because they loved me so very much and wanted to make sure that I was a good girl, so that when the time came, I would be accepted into the everlasting light, just like they would someday. I looked down in the box, and there on the bottom were a few small glass containers. They weren't more than a few inches long, and when I held them up to the light, the purplish liquid inside of them oozed back and forth as I tipped it. There were a few that were in the box that were already empty, but there were still 5 more that still contained that purple fluid. I tipped one back and forth, watching the ooze inside slide from side to side. I'd never seen anything so beautiful, even when I got to see the lights. I quickly stashed one of them away in my pocket. I selfishly wanted to be able to take it out at any time to tilt it and watch as the contents of the small glass container moved back and forth slowly. I packed the remaining things back into the box, closed it back up, making sure that the lock on the front was completely closed, and I pushed it back into the grate. I used the coin to rotate each of the screws back into place and walked back down to my room. I hoped Mother and Father would be back soon. It was longer than usual before Mother came back. She was upset. I could tell from the red around her eyes and her constant sniffling. Something had happened to Father. I knew it. Otherwise he would have come back with her. I moved over to sit beside her there on the padded floor and put my arm around her shoulders. Not quite long enough for me to be able to reach all the way across, but it was the thought that counts, right? Mother cried and moaned, repeating the name Sam over and over again. Mother rocked in place, clutching her knees close to her chest, her tears dripping down onto her knees. It took a long time, but finally Mother stopped crying. She smiled at me and told me everything would be okay and stroked my hair. I didn't realize quite how tired I was until she started running her fingers through my hair. My eyes grew heavy and I drifted off, leaving Mother to deal with her own thoughts. The next morning, Mother was already gone when I woke up. I sat up in my bed and looked around, but she was nowhere to be seen. I suspected she must have left to investigate this Sam she kept talking about. I stretched, feeling every joint and muscle protest at the sudden movement. A small slip of paper was on the floor next to my bed. I snatched it up and read it aloud. "I'll be back in a while. I love you so much, little one," it read. Mother always left me the best notes. I sat and waited for her to return for what felt like hours. But Mother never returned. I was hungry, so I pulled out the small pot that I had and dumped in some beans and cheese. When it was warm enough, I sat down facing the door, scooping the mixture into my mouth. I sat and waited. Time stretched on, and Mother never returned. I had long since finished my meager meal and was starting to get drowsy as the food worked its way through my system and required most of my energy to process. So I stood, forcing my body back into a state of motion, and moved towards the door. I needed to know what else was in that box behind the grate, inside those envelopes. I had more courage now. I was a big girl, and I convinced myself that I didn't even care if Mother came in and caught me. So I flung back the door to my room, snatched the coin from the table by the door, and strode down to the grate that hid this buried treasure. It took a few quick turns, and the screws were loose enough to pull the grate free. I pulled out the box, unlocked it with a small key, and once again looked inside. I nervously played with the small glass vial in my pocket. I knew that Mother would be so mad if I opened one of the other envelopes, but I didn't care as much as I used to. Besides, she wasn't even there and hadn't been in a long time. I grabbed an envelope with a different name than my own, one labeled Susan, and slipped my finger between the flap and the top of the envelope, pulling sharply out to open it. The edges ended up a bit ragged, but the first envelope was open. I turned it over, dumping the contents to the tile floor in front of me. It was mostly pictures, mixed with a few small scraps of paper. The pictures were of a small girl with dark hair and olive skin. She was smiling in some of them, but almost looked scared in others. And there, also in each of these pictures, were Mother and Father. I arranged all of the pictures on the floor in front of me, confused as to what I was seeing. Why were Mother and Father with this strange girl? Why did they look different? Father had more hair on the top of his head, and Mother had less lines in her face. I snatched up another envelope, this one labeled Kathy, and ripped it open as well, dumping the contents on top of the others already there on the floor. There was another girl, thin with almost glowing white skin and fierce red hair. And there, again, were Mother and Father. They looked even more different than in the other pictures. Mother was thinner, and Father didn't have the large stomach that I knew him to have. The clothes they were wearing were different too. I jumped up, trying to process what I was seeing. Who were these girls, and why were they with Mother and Father if I'd never seen them before? I looked down at the photos at my feet and noticed something I hadn't seen before. All of the photos were taken in the same room. My room. I glanced back down the hall, my mind reeling. I raced back down the hall and practically threw myself onto the bed, slamming the door loudly behind me. I dove back under the covers and, crying, tried to understand. I tried to calm myself and recited the tenets of the world of light over and over. I'd memorized them long ago after Father had taught them to me, and repeating them soothed me, and soon my heart slowed. Then a loud bang came from the hallway outside. It was the doorway up to the lights being thrown open, the impact of its battered metal echoing deafeningly down the hall as it slammed against the wall behind it. I heard heavy footsteps come down the stairs, then a long silence. A sound like a wounded animal moaning in pain echoed down the hall, and I cowered, wondering if the evil ones had found me after all. The steps started again, this time approaching my room, and my door flung open to reveal Mother standing there in the doorway, photos from the mess I'd made clutched to her chest. Heavy tears rolled down her face, dripping on the photos, making large wet spots where the paper absorbed the tears. "No, no, no," she repeated over and over again. "You weren't supposed to know. You weren't supposed to find out about the others. In 2 quick strides, she was at my bedside, towering over my small frame, a wild kind of anger flashing in her eyes, and a stench on her breath I'd never smelt before. My eyes darted back and forth between the pictures and Mother's enraged face. She lunged for me, narrowly missing the scruff of my shirt as I darted between her legs. She stumbled awkwardly, trying to turn in time to catch me, but it was too late. "You shouldn't know about the other girls," she shouted down the hall and tried to follow me, her feet seemingly too heavy for her to move correctly. She wobbled from side to side as she ran towards me, colliding more than once with the walls. I turned the corner and came to an abrupt halt at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the door to the outside. Mother crashed around the corner and almost lost her footing on the photos that still littered the floor. "Anna," she slurred and reached out towards me, tumbling forward. I leapt up the steps, taking them 2 at a time, and quickly reached the top. Mother was already following, climbing them on all 4s. The photos she'd carried discarded like trash around her. Outside was my only option. "Be brave, Anna," I thought to myself, and turned the knob. This time the door swung open wide, and I was instantly blinded by the warm light streaming in from outside. It was so impossibly bright that it burned as I tried to look around. I could hear people, but I couldn't see them. They sounded far off, not close like when we would come see the lights. Finally, my eyes adjusted to the light around me, and the world I knew was there, but different. The colors were much richer, and I could even count the blades of grass. I stood dazed by this bright, shiny world for what seemed to me like hours. But when I felt that hand grab me around the ankle, I realized it had only been a moment. Mother was pulling at my leg, screaming at me and trying to pull me back down. She stood up, wrapped an arm around my neck, and began to squeeze. I kicked and thrashed, but Mother held firm. It was getting harder to breathe, and a woozy feeling began to overtake me. An image of the glass vial in my pocket flashed through my mind, and I managed to pull it from my pocket, and with the strength I had left, I smashed it against Mother's hand, hoping the sharp pain would be enough to free her hold on me. She yelped in pain as small shards dug into the flesh of her hand, and I smelled something foul. And I saw that where the vial had smashed onto Mother's hand was turning a fierce shade of red and deepening into purple as I watched. "Now look what you've done," she hissed in my ear, still trying to drag me back down those stairs. I heard shouting, but it was far away. Was it me? Was I the one shouting? No, these voices were more like Father's, deeper and rougher. I was suddenly swept up off the ground and could feel Mother's arm being pulled from around my throat. The world began to come back into focus, and I could see 2 large men holding Mother down to the ground, both wearing the same clothes with a shining symbol attached to the front. One had a hard black thing attached to his belt and held in place by a small piece of leather wrapped around it. My mother fought back, screaming and striking out with both arms and legs, trying to get free. "My baby, give me back my baby," she wailed, looking at me with pleading eyes. One of the men looked up, no doubt checking to make sure I was being taken to safety. Mother took the opportunity and, using all of her might, pushed him backwards. As he toppled to the ground, she leapt towards me, her fingernails that she had kept so well manicured digging deep into the arm of the man that held me. He yelped in pain and almost dropped me. Then a loud explosion rang out, and Mother froze, then slumped to the ground, a pool of thick, dark blood forming in the grass around her. I watched in shock, my young mind not fully grasping the situation. Mother's head lifted slightly, her eyes wet and red. She reached towards me, trying to say something, but I couldn't make it out. and then collapsed. The man that held me turned and began to walk away, shielding me from onlookers, and took me over to his car, sat me in the back, buckled my seatbelt, and closed the door. The other men were all standing around Mother's immobile form and looking down at her, handing the photos from the box between them. My heart ached, and I knew Mother was gone. I later found out that Father had passed away the day that he and Mother had rushed out of my room to the surface. His heart had given out and was too far gone by the time he reached help for the doctors to do anything. I was adrift and alone, losing the only two people in my life so quickly, and the pain of it completely consumed me. I'm not sure what I would have done without the help of the nice people that took me in after that. They weren't like Mother and Father and looked at me oddly when I talked about the world of light and the tenants. But they provided for me, and they told me they really cared about me. And they gave me a room of my own with one door and one window. Thank you for listening to These Dark Spaces. We hope you enjoyed this story. You can find out more about us at thesedarkspaces.com or follow us on Twitter at thesedarkspaces. If you've enjoyed listening, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, keep your senses sharp, and your mind open.